안녕하세요. 아이비셉트 영어 강사 김다빈입니다. 반갑습니다. 오늘 IB English A Language Literature 겨울 특강에 대해서 소개해 드리겠습니다. 해당 특강은 IB Year 1, Year 2 공통으로 적용되며 SL과 HL 둘 다 들을 수 있습니다. 우선 저에 대해서 간단히 소개해 드리겠습니다. 저는 IB 디플로마를 이수했으며 총 45점 만점에 43점을 이수했고요. HL에서는 수학, 물리, 역사랑 English A, 영어 Lang Lit를 했고요. SL에서는 Visual Arts, 그리고 프랑스어 B를 했습니다. 서울대학교 영어 영문학과와 산업 디자인 전공에서 복수 전공생으로 졸업을 했으며 전 수파자에서 IB, IGCSE 토플 강사로서 일을 하다가 현재 아이비셉트 English 전임 강사로 활동하고 있습니다. 그래서 티칭 경력은 4년입니다. 네, 겨울 특강 프로그램에 대해서 간단히 설명해 드리겠습니다. 우선 첫 번째 주는 English A Paper 1을 집중적으로 다루겠습니다. 첫 번째 수업을 보시면은 학생들이 특히 애를 먹는 시각적 자료들, 즉 highly visual sources를 다루는 방식, 그리고 거기 필요한 용어들의 설명 등을 제가 가르치고자 합니다. 그래서 두 번째 수업에서는 글과 그림이 조금씩 더 섞이는 moderately visual sources로 넘어간 다음에 주로 텍스트 위주인 predominantly textual sources를 다루기 시작해서 두 번째 주의 첫 번째 수업까지는 이렇게 텍스트 타입들을 다루다가 두 번째 주의 두 번째 수업에서 페이퍼 1에 대한 정보를 마무리 짓고 그날 숙제가 나갈 예정입니다. 그리고 두 번째 주 셋째 수업부터는 페이퍼 2에 필요한 정보들을 가르치면서 마지막으로 페이퍼 2를 작성하는 연습도 있고 마지막 세 번째 주 마지막 수업에서는 학생들이 해온 숙제를 심도 있게 피드백을 해주며 어느 부분들을 신경 써야 되는지 개별적으로 피드백을 해줄 예정입니다. 자, 넘어가 샘플 수업을 하겠습니다. 해당 수업은 IB English 수업이다 보니 영어로 진행을 하겠습니다. Right, so to begin, we will be looking at the terms that can be used for highly visual sources. So above you have this list of various terms, and we're going to be going through them sequentially, understanding how each one works and what kind of explanations you can come up with for each. So yes, as I said, the above is a vocabulary required for you to read an image. Basically, you take an image, you deconstruct it, so you break it down to its basic elements in order to explain the meaning that has been constructed within. So let's first of all look at signifiers. Signifiers are the primary means through which an image conveys meanings. So it's like the content of the image. And we have three key terms under signifiers, and those are symbols, icons, and logos. You must understand and describe the connection between the signifier and what they signify in order to effectively explain meaning for a predominantly visual source. So now I'd like to ask you a question and just think about it for a bit. What is the difference between a symbol, an icon, and a logo? Okay, let's move on to find out. First of all, a symbol is an image that represents an abstract concept. We are all familiar with the heart acting as a symbol for love. Whereas an icon, we can also call them emojis now, but emojis will being a form of an icon. Well, so icons are images that are made to resemble what it is representing. So whereas a symbol is something that's based on the abstract concept, love actually doesn't look like anything, but we associate it with the heart. Whereas if you want to make an icon of a heart, you might make it seem like an actual heart. And a logo takes that one step further. A logo is a designed image. It's an image created with intent in order to be associated with an organization or company. So it's like an icon, but specific for an organization or company. So I'm pretty sure a lot of you are familiar with this mark. And you see the heart with the eyes, and you would immediately think of the name of the brand, Comme des Garçons. So this is our quick overview of what symbols, icons, and logos are and what their differences are. Moving on, we're going to now look at some visual arts terms that can be used for an effective paper one analysis of a visual source. So yes, terms for the visual arts can be used to further deconstruct and ascribe meaning to separate elements of an image. And we're going to be looking at a lot of terms. For each term, I would like you to think of how you can explain its effect on the audience and how this effect serves the image's purpose. Composition is basically understanding how separate visual elements are arranged in an image in respect to each other. So composition can be described in terms of size. So is each element large or is it small? Is it larger in comparison to another, or is it small in comparison to the other? Is it a close-up, so a small object that has been magnified, or is it zoomed out, a large object that has been seen from afar, therefore made small? We can also talk about composition in terms of position. So is one element on top of another element? Is it below another element? Are they adjacent next to each other? Are they overlapping? And last of all, we can talk about it in terms of orientation. Is the image placed in the bottom, in the middle, in the top? Is it the bottom left, top right, right in the center? Is it turned or is it rotated? So these are just some of the ways in which you could talk about composition. And the following two terms you'll be looking at, negative space and rules of thirds, are terminology that will help you further explain composition in more meaningful depth. So let's move on. So negative space can be easily defined as the empty and blank space that is not taken up by visual elements. So what negative space does is that it helps viewers focus on the dominant visual elements. And these two examples are showing that negative space can also be used to create an additional layer of meaning. For example, let's look at this first image. So we are all familiar with the Apple logo, I presume. The Apple logo is put in the center. There's nothing else surrounding it. So that blank space helps the viewer focus on the logo itself. But wait, you can see that the bitten off part of the apple is actually a silhouette of a person. And assuming you're familiar with Apple's history, we can assume that this is Apple's founder, Steve Jobs. So yes, Steve Jobs is colored in the same color as the background, the negative space. But this negative space now ascribes another layer of meaning to what was originally a simple logo. Likewise, if you look at this image, the dominant visual elements are actually the child, the mother, the father. So it is meant to represent a family, but the way they're positioned, the blank space that they create, these elements create, makes the silhouette of a dog. And through this advertising creates the meaning that adopting a dog, a puppy, is asking of the same, ask of the same responsibility as raising a child. Moving on, we're now going to be looking at the rule of thirds. To understand it simply, the rule of thirds is the division of an image into three horizontal and vertical portions. And we instinctively look at the intersections of these columns and rows. So imagine these lines were not there. We would nonetheless look at where these lines are meeting, which means an effective advertisement would place its most important information at the intersections of these portions. If you look at this advertisement for Mont Blanc, you'll see that the four most important points of information are quite close to the intersections. Nicolas Cage, the actor's smile, is very close, so that conveys satisfaction at the product. The watch itself is also placed near another intersection. The logo, the typography that represents the brand, is placed next to another intersection. And lastly, another image of the product and the caption that creates another layer of meaning to the image is placed adjacent to the fourth intersection. Abiding to the rule of thirds also gives steadiness and balance to an image's composition. So these are all ideas you can mention when talking about the rule of thirds for highly visual sources. We should also look at lighting. And lighting is basically a description of how an object or scene in an image is lit. And you can discuss lighting in the following terms. Is it warm? Or is it cool? Is it dark? Is it bright? Is it soft? Or is it harsh? Now let's look at the image to the right. You can see that it's a sunset. So it's a very warm lighting condition. And the light is quite soft. It's not harsh. There's not too much contrast happening in the image. And it's brighter than it is darker. But at the same time, what we need to understand is the direction from which the light is shining. This is also important because the areas that are made brighter gives us the points of focus that was intended in the image. So let's look at this image again. What parts of the image are especially brighter than the rest? The sky, the road, and certain portions of the car. So this, along with the warmth, the softness, and the brightness, creates an ideal image that helps us focus on the values this advertisement is supporting: freedom, the sensation of speed, the road, the sky ahead of you, the open car. So you can see how lighting helps an image create meaning. Color is also a very important aspect when discussing highly visual sources. Primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, are visually powerful and therefore have strong emotional and cultural connotations. For example, think of the color red. How many meanings can you associate with the color red? What about the color blue or the color yellow? As you can see, they have a lot of meanings that can be ascribed to them. So a lot of effective visual images, advertisements especially, make use of bold primary colors to grab attention, as this famous World War II poster does. Each color also has a complementary second color, which we will talk about in more depth. So red has a complementary color of green, yellow has a complementary color purple, and blue, the same goes for orange. Now, sometimes advertisements will purposely go for a lack of color variation. We call that monochrome. So when an image, it consists of only a single color, or black or white. And lastly, we're going to be looking at contrast. So contrast can be achieved through both lighting and color. So in this first example, the usage of harsh lighting has created an image with very strong contrast. The man, the perfume, the caption all stand out very strongly. And this visual contrast helps make the image memorable. It also makes the main visual elements of an image stand out very effectively. Likewise, here, the contrast is created through complementary colors. As we mentioned earlier, blue's complementary color is orange. We have the blue background and the orange and the white that stands out especially because of the blue background. So this also helps create a powerful and memorable visual effect. Now that we have looked at these elements, we are going to have a go at deconstructing the following images based on the terms we have covered. So I will give you a moment to look at the 4 images. Just have a go at determining what elements are being applied in each image. Okay, let's now have a look. The first image has 2 main elements at work. We have the use of symbols, signifiers. So we can see this is a combination of a fish and a cigarette. So the cigarette itself, what is it conveying? It's conveying the notion of pollution and also unhealthiness. We know that cigarettes cause a lot of physical harm to the user. What about fish? What kind of symbol is a fish? We can say it's a food item, and at the same time, it represents nature in the advertisement. And now, the second element that is at play here is negative space. So as I mentioned earlier, by purposely making the surroundings empty, the advertisement is makes the reader focus on the main visual element, which means that the image can now capture the viewer's attention easier and generates curiosity. We want to understand what this image is saying. We are drawn to the caption beneath. The higher the chance of reading the smaller text, the higher the chance the advertisement achieves its purpose. Right, we're going to now move on to the next image. Here, the 3 main elements being used are symbol, color, and rule of thirds. We have the crescent moon shape being formed by the image, and the crescent moon being a symbol for nighttime and for sleep is something important to the message that is being conveyed. What about the color now? We can see that the background color matches the color of the product, and because of that, the product almost is erased. It disappears into the background. It becomes negative space, and the symbol itself is visually emphasized. And lastly, if we divide up the image according to the rule of thirds, you can see that the brand and the product name is placed near the intersection. So yes, this image is also abiding to the rule of thirds. Moving on, the third image has 4 different elements at play. So 2 of them are signifiers. First of all, we need to look at them separately as symbols. So this is supposed to represent a stocking, which conveys, well, for a predominantly Western audience, it would convey the notion of Christmas, the festive spirit. At the same time, it is a blood pack, which, as we all know, is associated with blood transfusions, medical aid, life-saving, just hospital aid. And the 2 combine to create an icon. The blood pack is made to look like a Christmas stocking. So there you have 2 different signifiers at work at the same time. We also have the use of color contrast in this image. The background color, green, is a complementary color to the main visual element, which is in red. And because of that, it creates a strong sense of color contrast, which makes the image more memorable and makes the image stand out. You're far more likelier to pick this one out in a group of other images. And lastly, the rule of thirds also applies to this image. Divide the image up, you can see that the symbol, this is a blood transfusion symbol, and the caption that creates meaning in this image are placed at the intersections of the divisions. So yes, all images are following these rules in order to most effectively achieve their purposes. Lastly, this image also has a lot to do with symbolism. Again, we are looking at the tree that is formed by the overall image. So of course, this is a hand, these are leaves, but together they're meant to symbolize a tree, which in turn is a symbol of nature. And the hand is what we use to basically work. You know, without our hands, we can only do so much. So the hand is a symbol of human agency. We need to go one step further, however. Most students are going to be able to mention the tree and the hand, but what about the black background? What can that suggest? I would say it suggests space. It's a symbol for space or the void. Now, we're going to be looking at how this creates more meaning. So let's look at lighting and contrast. If you can see, there's a very harsh lighting condition here. The shadows are very strong. The light comes from one direction and the background is very dark. So this contrast between the dark background and the visual elements of the image creates a sense of isolation. And along with this lighting and contrast and the negative space created from the high contrast lighting conveys a message that we, mankind and nature, are alone in the universe and therefore must work together in order to survive. So you can see how just by looking at the terms specific for highly visual sources, we can derive a lot of meaning from an image. So yes, this concludes the sample lesson. Thank you for listening.